Picture this: a man standing on the touchline at Old Trafford, chewing gum with a face carved out of granite. A man whose glare could melt steel and whose voice could shake the walls of a dressing room. That man was Sir Alex Ferguson, the undisputed emperor of Manchester United. 13 Premier League titles, 2 Champions Leagues, dozens of domestic trophies. He didn't just manage United, he was United. The blood in the club's veins, the voice in its walls, the storm behind every triumph. But behind the banners and the statues, there's another Ferguson, one not made of silverware and smiles, but of fury, fear, and an obsession with control that bordered on madness. You see, Ferguson wasn't just a manager, he was a force of nature. Born in Glasgow, in a world where football wasn't just a pastime, it was survival. He carried that fire with him wherever he went. At Aberdeen, he turned a provincial Scottish club into European champions. And when Manchester United called in 1986, he arrived like a storm, ready to tear the old order apart. But glory never comes without casualties and Fergusons. Path to greatness was littered with them. He had that infamous hairdryer treatment, where he'd stand inches away from a player's face, screaming so hard the air alone could knock you backward. Players said they could feel the spit hit their forehead before they even understood what they'd done wrong. It wasn't anger for the sake of it. It was control. Total control. Fergie believed that fear was the best motivator, and discipline was the only religion that mattered. And if you didn't believe in it, he'd make sure you paid for it. And then, of course, came Roy Keane, Ferguson's on-field reflection. Fire meeting fire. 2 hard-headed men who didn't just share a dressing room, they shared a kind of dangerous respect. From 1993 to 2005, the pair ruled England. 7 league titles, 4 FA Cups, a Champions League, the stuff of legend. Keane was the enforcer, Ferguson the general. But 2 alpha wolves can't share the same forest forever. It started with small cracks. A disagreement here, a criticism there. And then, one day in 2005, it all exploded. Roy Keane had done an interview on the club's TV channel, brutally honest, as always, calling out teammates for being lazy, uncommitted, and weak. Ferguson was livid. He called a meeting, the whole squad, the coaches, everyone. The video played. Silence followed. Keane looked around and asked if anyone had a problem with what he said. Nobody spoke. But Fergie did. The argument that followed was volcanic. Words turned into shouts. Shouts turned into roars. And before anyone could blink, Ferguson lunged across the room, the veins in his neck bulging, his face crimson. Players had to hold him back from his own captain. It was chaos, pure, frightening chaos. The next day, Keane showed up at training as if nothing had happened. But it was over. 12 years of blood, sweat, and glory gone in a single eruption. Fergie later said if he'd let that slide, he'd have lost the dressing room. Maybe he was right. But that's what made him both brilliant and terrifying. The unshakable belief that he was always right. Roy Keane never forgave him. Even years later, in interviews, Keane's voice still carried that cold, restrained fury. You could feel the wound hadn't healed. But Keane wasn't the only one who felt the burn of Ferguson's wrath. Another name would soon collide with the gaffer's iron fist, literally. David Beckham. When Beckham rose through the ranks, he was every manager's dream. A tireless worker, a magician with the ball, a man who could bend a free kick like he was sculpting air. But he was also something new, a global icon. The face on magazine covers, the husband of posh spice, the man who turned footballers into celebrities. And that was a problem. Ferguson believed no one was bigger than the club. Not even Beckham. Especially not Beckham. Their relationship became a silent war. Beckham's fame grew. Ferguson's patience shrank. To Fergie Beckham's jet-setting lifestyle, fashion shows, and commercials were distractions, cracks in the foundation of discipline he'd built. And then came the breaking point. February 2003, United had just lost to Arsenal in the FA Cup, a brutal defeat. The dressing room was silent until Ferguson burst through the door. He was incandescent with rage, cursing, shouting, kicking anything within reach. Beckham muttered something back, a mistake he'd regret forever. Ferguson swung at a boot lying on the floor. It flew through the air and smacked Beckham right above the eye. Blood, real blood. The golden boy of English football, face cut open by his manager's flying boot. Within hours, it was everywhere. The newspapers, the TV, the tabloids. A simple locker room explosion turned into front-page humiliation. Ferguson tried to laugh it off, calling it a freak accident. But the damage was done not just to Beckham's face, but to Ferguson's image. The mighty gaffer, once seen as a father figure, was now a tyrant with terrible aim. Beckham, ever the PR genius, leaned into the story. Paparazzi caught him leaving his house with stitches under his eyebrow, his hair perfect, his face stoic. The media called him the victim. Fergie became the villain, and soon Beckham was gone, off to Real Madrid. Another casualty of the empire. Yet for every player Ferguson clashed with there was another who flourished under his brutal love. Enter Cristiano Ronaldo. When Ronaldo first arrived at United, he was a skinny teenager from Madeira, all steepovers and spark but no substance. Ferguson saw something others didn't: a diamond. Raw and full of arrogance, but destined to shine, he protected him fiercely. When reporters mocked Ronaldo for diving, Ferguson went ballistic, even once lunging at a Sky Sports journalist for daring to criticize his boy. That's the paradox of Ferguson. He could destroy you or defend you with the same ferocity. It all depended on whether you were his player or someone he'd decided was no longer worthy of the badge. Ferguson's world was simple. Loyalty meant everything. Betray him, challenge him, outshine him, and you'd be gone. Stay loyal, and he'd make you a legend. Giggs, Scholes, Neville, his disciples. Beckham, Keane, Van Nistelrooy, his fallen angels. But here's the thing, for all the fury, all the control, all the chaos, Ferguson won. Every single time. The boot incident didn't destroy United. Keane's exit didn't end the dynasty. Even after losing stars, he rebuilt stronger, hungrier, more ruthless than before. When he retired in 2013, it wasn't a defeat. It was an empire, finally at peace. Ferguson, the last of his kind, a manager who ruled, not by data or directors, but by sheer will. And even in his retirement, his shadow still looms over the theater of dreams. He's 82 now. The voice is softer, the temper cooled. He shows up sometimes at Old Trafford, sitting quietly in the stands, watching a world that's changed beyond recognition. A world where players tweet apologies instead of taking a hairdryer to the face. Yet, every fan who remembers that era knows without Ferguson, Manchester United would never have become the global religion it is today. He built dynasties, broke egos, and shaped football itself. Yes, he was ruthless. Yes, he was controlling. But he was also brilliant, the kind of man who could turn ordinary players into warriors. So maybe, in the end, that's the price of greatness. To be loved and feared in equal measure. To be a hero and a villain, sometimes in the same story. Sir Alex Ferguson wasn't just the king of Old Trafford, he was the architect of its mythology. The man who turned chaos into glory. The gaffer who ruled football not with tactics, but with terror, trust, and that unrelenting hunger to win, no matter who got burned along the way. Because to Ferguson, football was never just a game. It was war. And he never, ever lost one.